Why do people feel unhappy? Unhappiness is an emotional response to feelings of dissatisfaction with something in a person's life. So, in order to determine why people feel unhappy, we must first determine why they are dissatisfied and what, if anything, we can do to alleviate this dissatisfaction. As a scientist, it is my job to look for patterns in the world around us, to come up with theories, and to test those theories by gathering and analyzing data. It's no secret that nowadays I spend the majority of my time actively participating in the furry fandom, and this gives me plenty of opportunity to notice trends and patterns within its members and the community as a whole. I'm going to talk today about some patterns that I've seen within the furry fandom and its members, relate those patterns to the wider world, and see what conclusions we can come to. Let's begin by looking at the world of furry artists. How many furry artists do you know who believe that they are terrible at what they do, even though in many cases they are actually greatly skilled? In fact, how many furries get so demotivated by their lack of self-belief as artists that they take forced breaks from art, find that it becomes a chore? The reality is that almost every artist in the furry fandom, and indeed many in the wider world, suffer from this crippling self-deprecation, which ultimately leads to unhappiness, procrastination, loss of productivity, and a general sense that the hobby that they enjoyed once upon a time has become a negative presence in their life. Let us backtrack through an artist's timeline. Clearly, it is the case that to have become an artist in the first place, the person must have had enthusiasm, passion, drive, motivation, and a desire to pursue art as a hobby. So what has changed? Clearly the artist is far more skilled now than they were when they began. Yet they are far more depressed and unhappy about their current skill level than they were when they first started. Surely this is backwards. Why has the happiness been sucked out of their hobby, to the point where many openly wish that they had never even started to draw? I have passively observed many artists experiencing this phenomenon, and have indeed actually engaged with a few more actively, in order to determine what patterns and trends are present here, causing this decline in happiness as an artist. And the common theme is that when an artist is very new, they are not concerned with what others think of their work. After all, they're a beginner, so it would be unreasonable for people to have high expectations from what they produce. However, when an artist becomes more skilled, for example, having produced a number of commissions, or simply having been actively practicing their hobby for a year or two, there is absolutely a clear pattern that the concern of what other people think of their work and how their work is judged grows greatly. Let us consider now a different kind of person. Those furries who, and indeed people generally who, are part of a community for social reasons. For example, the sort of people who enjoy to sit in a voice chat and talk for several hours per day. The sort of people who type a lot in the text channels within Furry Valley, or indeed as part of a wider community outside of the furry fandom, for example Reddit or Twitter. Again, when a person is new to a community, or starting to build their skills on the social interaction side of things, they are generally happier. Let us consider things from the perspective of a brand new furry in Furry Valley. This person is very likely unconcerned that they may not know anything about the fandom, or they may have to ask basic newbie questions about the fandom. But compare this to a person who has been around in the furry fandom for many years. I'm sure we all know some people who have been around for a while, who are reluctant to ask questions about the fandom, or admit that they need a little bit more information about a topic that is being discussed in a social context. As such, Their overall happiness in social situations tends to be lower when not entirely on top of the topic because they are anxious about being left behind, or in their minds worse, the idea of being found out that they do not know very much about a particular furry topic. The great irony is that the confidence, happiness, and sheer presence of a person who is new can eclipse those of a person who has been around for quite some time in the fandom, even though the latter clearly has a far greater knowledge and depth of understanding of the furry fandom and topics within the fandom than the newbie. Let us think now about a third set of people, this time in the wider world than just the furry community. When a person begins to learn a foreign language, at least when doing so by choice, they are often filled with a sense of great curiosity, exploration, and excitement. They persistently give nouns the wrong gender, fail to conjugate any verbs correctly, know barely any vocabulary, and have often hilariously poor pronunciation in verbal communication. But while making all of these mistakes, they are happy and they are engaged without worry. Opposite this, we have people who are experts in a foreign language but are not quite fluent. For example, a Spanish person who would love to have a job as a translator. Each time they use English, they are uncomfortable and afraid of being exposed, as they view it, as a non-native speaker by making a mistake with a complicated grammatical structure, or by making a sound that no one with a native accent would make. They do not enjoy and are not happy with their skill and using it because they feel pressured and anxious. The mistakes they make, in their minds, are somehow worse and more critical than the far more extreme mistakes that the beginner makes with reckless abandon. To help us understand what is going on here, let's think back to when we were toddlers, or perhaps to a young child, maybe aged 2 or 3, that you know in real life at the moment. When they play or learn, they are filled with a sense of curiosity and exploration, regardless of what they are doing. Maybe they are learning the alphabet and get things muddled up sometimes. Maybe they are starting to talk with the other children in kindergarten, learning how to share, how to interact, and how to be social. Maybe they are putting their hands in brown paint, blobbing it onto paper as their first forays into becoming Da Vinci. They are happy, despite how they are objectively performing very poorly in the grand scheme of things. Let's come back to where we began. I mentioned that as a scientist, it is my job to look for patterns in the world around us in order to test theories and learn, so that I may then in turn educate others to help them live better lives. In particular, my area of research is efficiency of skill acquisition, so I have focused very intently on many people across a whole spectrum of different kinds of skills, and within those skills, people who have a very varied range of competencies. Part of efficiency of skill acquisition is based on motivation, and motivation is at least in part driven by happiness. So my research, along with my natural curiosity and overindulgence in binge reading psychology research papers, has brought me to explore the questions around why happiness levels go down as people get better in a skill, regardless of what the skill itself actually is. And here is the result of my research into this phenomenon. The reason why people are unhappy generally in any field, and indeed at any skill level, is almost always because of a fear of being judged or perceived to be inadequate, inferior, or somehow unacceptable in a social context by one's peers. The artist who has spent 5 years of her life perfecting her craft feels sad and decides to give up painting because of a fear that those around her, many of whom have no skill in her field, may pick up on the intricate and complicated subtleties of colour theory and critique her latest piece. The experienced furry, who has spent countless hours introducing and welcoming others to the furry fandom, decides to back away into the real world because of a fear that they may come across as lacking authority in a field with remarkable variance in which they believe they are expected to have perfect knowledge. The linguist, who has the required skill to land a job working at the United Nations, decides not to apply because they fear rejection and judgment from those who would consume their work and be greatly informed by their expertise and fantastic capabilities of bringing the world and the people within it closer together. The toddler, on the other hand, in all of his or her inelegance, continues to do what he or she is doing, unfazed by those who may see or judge their progress or poor skill level, persisting regardless, without worry or fear of judgment, learning and improving without motivational drops, in a state of productive flow and happiness. We, as a society, miss out on so much greatness in every single field because people choose to give up due to having lost their happiness and as a result having lost their motivation. It is a massive tragedy of society that this is being allowed to occur, but it is a result of society that this does occur. Society teaches us that success comes from perfection rather than from exploration, learning, and the process by which we reach our goals. As a result, instant gratification is sought, and the reality is simply that if it were easy to become perfect in a skill, then that skill in itself would become meaningless and pointless to master, because so many would have already perfected it. The implication, however, on a psychological level, is that as a person, you may be perceived to be weak or a failure if you do make mistakes, no matter how small those mistakes may be. The key difference, and the reason why people who are new to a skill generally feel much less intimidated and demotivated by this societal pressure, is that society's expectation on a person to succeed in a given skill is proportional to their level in that skill. As such, a beginner feels very little pressure to succeed. After all, observers looking at the toddler or equivalent newbie artist as an adult smearing paint or lines on a page behave in an encouraging fashion. However, there are also two personal problems that are present here. The second, or rather its resolution, is the key to finding happiness. The first is the idea that society, and indeed those people around you on a close level, are paying a lot less attention to you, to what you are doing, and your mistakes than you personally believe they are. Research has conclusively shown that people are present around 95% of the time in what is known as the subconscious level of existence. Your mind is split into two levels. The upper level is known as conscious awareness, and the lower level is known as your subconscious. Your conscious awareness is responsible, for example, for logical processing, intense focus, and active situational judgment. Your subconscious awareness is responsible for automatic processes, for example, breathing, typing in a password that you know well, and finding your way home when you're a little too drunk on a Friday night. In particular, this means that for a person to critique or judge you, they must be functioning in their conscious level of awareness. For a start, this only occurs for them, or indeed any other person on average, around 5% of the time. That is only around 1 hour every day. So, by statistics alone, it is very unlikely that at any given time they are consciously focused on you. Moreover, another set of research has investigated asking people how much they focus on others around them and the things they are doing, and conversely, how much they believe others focus on what they are doing. The research consistently concludes that people believe they are being watched and judged far more closely than they actually are. The reality is that the person sat opposite you on the train is much more likely thinking about what they might want to eat for food that evening than on the fact that one of the eyes on the cat you've just drawn in your sketchbook looks a little bit awkward. Now, here is the second personal problem. You care about what people think of you. In particular, you care too much what people think of you. This is a big mistake. Think about how many people you meet in an average year, and how many of them you still know the next year, or indeed a week after you met them. The reality is that most people in your life are innately transient. You are extremely unlikely to see the person sat opposite to you on the train again. Suppose they do consciously judge you and think you are a bad artist. They are gone from your world, likely forever, when they get off at their train stop. But you remember their judgment and allow it to affect you for years. There is a beautiful parable of two Buddhist monks who come to a river and see a young lady who needs help to cross. The monks are bound to a chow of the bar. The monks are bound to a vow of chastity and must avoid contact with women. The younger monk abstains from helping the lady, for to do so would be to violate his vows. However, the older monk gladly takes her and carries her across the river. A few hours later, back in the monastery, the younger monk confronts the elder. Why did you touch her? Why did you carry her across the river? You have broken our vows. And the older replies with this. I put the lady down the moment I had finished carrying her across the river. Why are you still carrying her? We can all learn from this. By reflecting on criticism or perceived criticism, which may not even be real, from a perspective of learning and self-improvement, rather than of demotivation and unhappiness, we free ourselves from the tribulations of a judging society, especially from those who are unquestionably transient in our lives. This is how to find happiness, to not care, or to at least care a lot less what others think about you. The artist who almost sacrificed her career now finds joy as a professional painter, focusing on her own happiness and pleasure expressed through the amazing pieces she creates, and has had exhibitions in London, Paris, and Milan. She is a client and friend of mine that I worked with in 2015. The Spanish linguist, who was concerned about his accent making people judge him and realized that he was indeed a non-native speaker, is now one of the most prolific esports commentators for League of Legends in the world. He and I had a relationship and worked together back in 2016. And the social furry, who wanted to know everything, to help others, to educate them, and not to seem foolish in the face of those who may expect perfection from them. That is me. There was a time where all of this self-doubt, demotivation, and unhappiness afflicted me in my own domain, the same as it afflicts anyone who allows it to, no matter what domain they focus on. But that is the important point. You allow or refuse to allow other people to influence your mood and the way you feel by their judgment of your actions, skills, and preferences. It is a choice, a conscious choice that each of us must make in order to find and embrace happiness. To forsake doing so is a travesty. You deny yourself your hobbies, your pleasure, your happiness. You deny those close to you and wider society the amazing benefits you can bring to the world with your true skills, even though you are imperfect and always will be imperfect. In life, those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind. Choose to be you. Live for yourself. Do what you want to do, and never, ever, ever allow another person to bring you down or to sacrifice your happiness. It is your life. Choose to take control. Choose to be happy. Choose to be proud of yourself and to not be one bit afraid to drop those who insist that you are not good enough. There are over 7.5 billion people in the world. In the furry fandom, there are somewhere between 5 and 10 million. Find those who cherish you and learn to cherish yourself. Build self-esteem based on self-love rather than the approval of others. Your life and your consciousness is a vessel for your existence, your happiness, your dreams, your goals, your hopes, and your destiny. It is not and must never become a tool for someone else's satisfaction. When we are old and we look back on our lives, it is the things that we did not do that we regret. The things that we were too afraid to pursue, quite often through fear of judgment. Live your life now and in the future with no regrets, with no hesitation, and with no concern of those who may seek to bring you down. Be you, be truly you. Cast off the shackles of judgment of transient society and choose to be happy. Thank you. Whenever you're ready, Corn, I'm good to go.
Alrighty. So, first we have Death Bunny, and he had two questions.
Okay.
The first one is it okay to be in a relationship if you struggle with depression?
Yes, it's very much okay to be in a relationship if you struggle with depression. However, you should make sure that you don't settle for someone who isn't good enough for you simply because you're depressed and you feel desperate in some sense that you want to have someone. You want to be very careful that you're not with someone so that you don't feel depressed. You should be with someone because you love them rather than using them as a crutch to overcome your depression. If you can separate those two, then yes, absolutely. It's very healthy to have a relationship, and research studies have shown that those who are in a relationship have a higher average level of happiness than those who are not in a relationship.
Alrighty. His second question was, does exercise and a healthy diet really affect or make a difference in being able to be a happier person?
Yes, exercise and a healthy diet affects the hormones and chemicals that your brain produces, that the rest of your body produces, and your happiness is directly influenced by these chemicals. So yes, absolutely it does. Eating healthily and exercising regularly is essential for improving your mood. And it's free. It doesn't cost anything. Exercise more.
Alrighty. Next up is Ashwat Senpai, who asks, after one finds happiness, how does one manage to keep it? And what if that happiness gets stale and you become accustomed to it? Is there a way to make yourself happy with the same things, or will you have to keep reaching for more?
Well, given that you have happiness, it's important to be conscious of why you have that happiness. The fact you have happiness means something's making you happy. So figure out what that something is. Once you've figured out what it actually is that's making you happy, you can focus on that thing. If it turns out that that thing is stale, then by definition it's not making you happy anymore. And you can think, why Does it not make me happy anymore? I mean, if it's a hobby, it might just be that you're bored of it, which is completely normal and natural and means that you might want to have a different hobby for a while. If it's a relationship, then you might want to think, what can we do to respark things? It's difficult to give a prescriptive general answer here because it depends what exactly your happiness is from, but that's the overall view I've got of it.
Alrighty. Next is a question from Foxy the Pirate Fox Cat who asks, what happens if someone had major depression? How can you help them get out of depression with medication?
Well, medication affects the chemicals and hormones in your body, so that's sort of going back to the same sort of point as exercise, and I'm not going to comment in detail on that. As far as overcoming depression, it's a very vast topic which is difficult to cover in such a short time, but I would advise you to look at how you feel based on the judgment of others. So think about what I've said in the talk, because it might be the case that a large part of why you're depressed is because you're afraid of what others might think about you, or you're afraid of not being good enough in the eyes of others. That was what caused my depression when I was younger. And so if you can rationalize that and move past that, that might be a key in getting better.
Okay. Next up is a question from Daddy Jax. He asks, one of the more common issues I have found is that many people seem to lack confidence in their self, deeming themselves unworthy of happiness, leaving them to a point where they can't ever find happiness. I wonder what solutions you might offer to help fix this issue.
Well, a sense of unworthiness comes from feeling that you're not good enough. If you feel that you're not good enough, you have to think, well, why do I feel I'm not good enough? What does being good enough mean? If you are performing a skill or living your life as you want to, and you're true to the virtues and the morals which you stand by, then objectively that is good enough. No one can expect you to live your life by their own morals or their own virtues, or to do something for them. You have to be true to yourself. I think as long as you're true to yourself, that's a big factor in that.
Alrighty. Next question comes from Jay, and he asks, is self-acceptance in line with true happiness?
Yes, you must build self-love and happiness on a foundation of self-esteem. Because if you start to value yourself based on how others perceive you or how others think about you, then you're riding your happiness on someone else's opinions, which may well change. So your entire self-esteem could collapse if your friend decides they don't like you anymore, and that's entirely unsustainable. So absolutely, you must accept yourself, and you must build that foundation of self-esteem and self-love on self. I mean, there's a reason it's got self in the name. So yes, absolutely. Self-acceptance, accept yourself, build self-love, build happiness on top of that.
Alrighty. Next up is Ventus, who asks, do you think happiness is easier found in friendship, or has playing games taken over? Or is that fully dependent on the person now?
Sorry, say it again.
Okay. Do you think happiness is easier found in friendship, or has playing games taken over, or is that fully dependent on the person now?
Well, I'd say that when you play games with people, then you're playing games with your friends. That's part of friendship. If you mean playing games by yourself, then I would argue that that's not necessarily happiness. That's engagement for sure. You can have fun while playing a game, but does it really make you happy? I'm not sure.
Alrighty. Our next question comes from the better Ventus, who asks, how do you
Okay, go on, go on.
He asks, how do you find the how do you balance the happiness of yourself when you have the desire to make other people happy?
Well, it comes back to what I was saying about there being literally billions of people in the world. If to make others happy, you would have to make yourself unhappy, then I'm sorry, but those are not the people you should be focused on. Those are not the people you should be around. There are plenty of people in the world who will be happy when you're happy doing the same sort of things you do. Like if you want to do activity X to make yourself happy and that upsets the people around you, well then go and find people who are okay with it and approve of you doing that and want to do it with you and support you.
Alrighty. Our next question is from Victor Lincoln Pine, who asks, is it possible to be happy without any real friends, as in without any friends aside from social media?
I would argue that although the internet is a virtual world, it's always important to really remember that the people on it are real. And just because you only have friends on social media, as you put it, doesn't mean that you have friends on social. You still have the emotional connection to them, and scientists have done monitoring where they've um, tracked how much of certain chemicals are in your body when you interact with people you term friends online compared to the real world. And there's a similar number of chemicals of various types and such. So your brain recognizes friends on the internet as real as friends in the real world. So I would argue absolutely it's definitely possible to have social happiness online as equally as it is in real life. Yes, 100%.
Alrighty. Um, Marlboro, I think I said that right, asks, sometimes it feels impossible to find real happiness after someone important leaves your life. How can we get that happy feeling again?
So this again comes down to the idea that your happiness should be based on self love and that sort of not quite selfish basis, but it has to be a personal, internal basis. If your happiness is based on anything external, be that another person or say your job or whatever else it may be, then you run the risk that they can take that away from you. So it comes down to reconstructing the foundation you've got. It may have been the case that if you were in a relationship with someone and then you break up, you may have been reliant on them for happiness, which is not healthy. It may be the case, but if that is the case, you need to then reassess and say, okay, I realize now that we've broken up and God, I feel absolutely terrible. I can't seem to get past it. Now I realize I don't have that foundation, that self esteem, that self love there. That's dependent on me, not the other person. So I would go back and construct that. Because until you construct that, you're only ever going to be dependent on that person if they come back or the next person you end up with. And that always sets you up to fail. So take care of yourself first so that when you're in a relationship, even if it goes wrong, you've still got yourself to fall back on afterwards.
Alrighty. Saradath asks, if happiness can in some ways be level to fulfillment, how can someone find it in a mindless corporate machine?
Well, I suppose if you're coming at this from a perspective that your job is dull and you struggle to find fulfillment in your job, I mean, for one, you could change your job. Don't necessarily spend 40 years of your life in a job that you're not happy with because you spend more hours, more of your waking hours at work than you do outside of work. Remember that. So, yeah, think about changing your job for a start, but also remember that your entire life is not your job. So, it may be the case that you have no option at the moment, at least, than to work this job. In which case, make sure that your life outside of that job contains enough happiness so that you can almost autopilot the work, get it out of the way with, and then make the most of your time outside of that. But absolutely, if you're stuck in a place like that, find a new job. You can't allow yourself to spend 40 years in a job like that. It's just not the modern way. People may have done this many years ago, but this isn't how it has to be nowadays.
Our next question is from Angelic Demon, who asks, how far should we strive for happiness until it is not worth it? Is seeking material happiness a good or a bad thing?
Well, you've sort of conflated two things there. So material wealth does not necessarily imply happiness. There have been again more interesting research done, which looks at the yearly income of families in the US compared to the happiness level. And I can't remember exactly the number, but it's something like after about $80,000 or $100,000 of household income, the average happiness level of the people tails off. So it doesn't keep increasing linearly or indeed at all almost with the extra money you earn. So you could earn $1 million and only feel slightly more happy than someone who earned 100,000. So generally people are, in terms of material wealth, you'll generate all the happiness you're going to get for it if you have a house, if you have food, and if you have enough money to be able to function socially and manage that side of your life without too much worry or anxiety. So yeah, don't sacrifice time and happiness generally to make twice as much money if you already make that amount, because you're not going to get extra happiness from it. But you might get more happiness from your time if you were not to focus on making excessive amounts of money.
Alrighty. Let's see. Gonna start taking questions from the Teddy Talks chat now. Our first one is from Arovos, who asks, in the TED Talk, your main focus is unhappiness equals self-doubt. Do you think self-doubt is one of the core values of unhappiness? And is there a sort of unhappiness without or lesser form of self-doubt?
I think it's not so much self-doubt, but rather being unfair to yourself with the mistakes or imperfections you might have. So it's a little bit subtle, but you absolutely must acknowledge that you are not perfect, but it comes with accepting that that's okay. That's the key. So I would say that unhappiness is, at least one of the cornerstones of unhappiness is not being able to accept that you're imperfect and that it's okay to be imperfect. And especially from other people, allowing them to make you feel bad because you're imperfect. So it's not that you doubt yourself or doubt that you're perfect, because you're not perfect. It's accepting that you're not perfect and accepting that others have no right to make you feel bad because you're not perfect. You are who you are and you do what you do. And if they don't like that, that's their problem.
Alrighty. Our next question is from Daddy Cool Vipper, who asks, do you value short-term and long-term happiness differently?
Yes. Short-term happiness doesn't necessarily lead to long-term happiness. A very good example of this, I've got an Oreo milkshake on my desk. If I drank it all in one go, I'd feel pretty good for about 10 seconds, then I'd feel really sick and I'd think, crap, why did I do that? And then I might feel bad for the rest of the evening. A lot of the time, long-term happiness comes from fulfilling a goal that you've worked very hard for. For example, suppose you're an Olympic athlete and you've trained for 5 or 6 years and you get up each morning, 4 a.m., you go for a 5-mile run, you take a break, you go to the gym, you work out. Then your life is a grind. You're sacrificing a lot of short-term happiness to work and work and work. But it's because you value the long-term goal and the happiness that working towards that, your dream, your ambition, will give to you. So often I would say that short and long-term happiness are, I mean, there are some instances where you can have both. For example, if you do a little bit of exercise, you feel pretty good, and long term, you feel good because you're healthy for longer. But generally, if you want a hedonistic short term fix, you snort some cocaine, it might make you happy for a very short amount of time, but it is not going to make you happy long term. And similarly, the other way as well. If you sacrifice things short term, they might well make you feel a lot better long term.
Alrighty. Our next question is from Nova, and he asks, so is happiness not the default for neurotypical people?
I would say that it is the default for neurotypical people, as is expressed in the case of the toddler. When the toddler makes a mistake or isn't perfect, he's perfectly happy with it. The problem is that society corrupts that view. Society corrupts the idea that you are just you and that's the way it is and that's okay, because society judges you. Society expects more from you and it's relentless. It's relentless from the time you're 3, 4, 5 years old and you start school and you get compared against your classmates, and there are some things you can't do, and there are some people who tell you you can't do these things, you'll never be able to do that, or and so you get it bred into you from a very young age that you aren't good enough and you have problems and you'll never be good enough. But that's not how you were born. That's not the default, because the toddler has not experienced that and does not display any signs of it.
Alrighty. Our next question is from Atlas, and he asks, do you have any tips for lowering unrealistic expectations for yourself and your work?
Well, acknowledgement is an important part of that. By recognizing that you're setting yourself unrealistic goals, you can set yourself more realistic goals. I think you're in a more dangerous position if you can't see that your goals are unrealistic, because then you're always setting yourself up to fail, and then you get upset because why am I always failing? If you have the self-actualization to notice I'm consistently setting myself unrealistic goals, then you can do something about that. So I would say, yeah, just you can have awareness that you're doing this, so be more fair to yourself. Set yourself goals that you may set to your best friend if they were in the same position you are.
Okay. Next up is Miles, and he asks, is it worth taking the risk of relying on someone else for your own happiness despite the fact they might let you down on that responsibility?
No,
Quote,
never. The whole idea of this is that you build your self-love, your self-worth, and your happiness on yourself, not someone else, because no one else in your life is guaranteed to be there forever. And certainly don't think that anyone else in your life has responsibility or obligation to you, because people can and will drop you at the drop of a hat, even when they've known you for 10 years, 20 years sometimes. And if you have built your life and your self-worth on something like that and then it crashes down, you're going to have an absolute crisis. So you must defend yourself on that and create that self-sustaining thing that comes from within, comes from in you, rather than someone else externally. Even if they're a family member, you can't necessarily rely on them forever. No one is there forever. The only person who's there for your whole life is you.
all right. We have a couple of questions, or a couple more questions from Victor Lincoln Pine, so I'll start with this one first. Could some unhappiness with once pleasant hobbies be in fact a reaction to having that hobby associated with something unpleasant, like a breakup or the dread of an impending deadline?
Sorry, could you read the first bit again?
Could some unhappiness with once pleasant hobbies be in fact a reaction to having that hobby associated with something unpleasant, like a breakup or the dread of an impending deadline?
Yeah, it's definitely possible. There's some research on how people associate pieces of music with historic events in their life. And it may be the case that you had a favorite song when you were younger and you used to listen to that song with the person you were with at the time. And then you have a horrible breakup, and forever onwards you associate that song with the person who you were with. And therefore the song that you liked a lot becomes an unpleasant song. So a hobby or an event or something you listen to perhaps is not necessarily in a vacuum. It's combined with factors that may be around it. So in that case, the music is conflated with the relationship you had at the time, So when you hear the music, you've got that association. As for whether you can undo that, you can't undo it, but what you can try to do is associate pleasant connotations with the thing that has negative connotations already associated with it. For example, in the music idea, you might want to listen to that music track while you're doing something you enjoy, or while you're doing something with a person you like at the moment. So it's almost it's not, imagine it like a hard disk. It's not really that you're deleting data on it. You're not deleting the old memories, but you're trying to sort of write over them with new ones.
Alrighty. His second question was, could the loss of happiness experienced by experts actually be a result of the loss of the joy of learning?
I think yes, but I think a large part of the joy of learning is re-experiencing that same childish lack of care and lack of fear of judgment that you did experience when you were a toddler. So I think they're almost the same thing. A joy of learning is a joy of not being judged when you're failing, and therefore you would feel more happiness from that. Yeah.
Alrighty. And that's all the questions
Cool.
in the doc and in the Teddy Talks chat.
All right. We have a few minutes left, so if anyone else has any questions, any follow-up stuff, feel free to ask in Teddy Talks. Otherwise, we'll finish in a couple of minutes. I'll record a closing thing once people are done. Con as well. I've got it ready up here.
Someone's writing something in the.
Yeah, it looks like Nova's typing something. You ready for tabletop after this? Oh wait, you're not a comms admin, are you? I keep thinking you're a comms admin. Experience. We're oh, Miles has left call, I see. Alright, let's finish after Nova's question.
Alright. Nova asked, if it's society's fault, should we just Thor? I'm not gonna.
That's a philosopher.
Thorian? I think it's
Thoreau.
Thoreau. Okay. If it's society's fault, should we just throw live in the woods sort of deal, or is that relationship with society salvageable?
I think to bring societal change, you need to bring change on a governmental level. I don't think it's practical. And so I think, I mean, I don't think it's society's fault per se. You have a choice as to whether or not you wish to be influenced in a negative way by the judgment of those around you. And you can choose not to be. You can choose to say, okay, well, I'm going to do what I do. And if you don't like it, you can screw off. And I'm going to associate with those who do appreciate what I do. And I'm not going to allow your judgment of me to make me feel bad. So I don't think it's society's fault per se. I think it's society's fault that we generally negatively condition that toddler to become an adult who is so desperately seeking of approval of his or her peers. But I don't think you have to bow on a personal level to what society has conditioned you to. Once you're aware it's happening, you can then stand against it and be like, okay, I see what's happened, but I'm going to choose not to be affected by that myself. And it's a difficult thing, but it is certainly something you can consciously do with enough practice. Thank you to our live audience, as well as everyone else who has either asked the question or is listening to this TEDdy Talk on the Furry Valley YouTube channel. For anyone who has not already done so, please subscribe to us on YouTube and like the videos on our channel. Thank you all for coming and listening.